Kia ora, talofa, namaste, haere, and welcome to this week's episode of the Niche Cast. We are from the Niche Cache, the niche-cache.com, where you can read about Aotearoa sport and you can just have a jolly old time. We've got a fresh Aotearoa Warriors versus Manly Seagulls preview that is live. We'll whip up the NRL Wahine preview as well for tomorrow. We've got the Flying Kiwis live at the moment. Bit of a tricky week to get things done for the website, but there's some details there. There's some information there. And of course, we do have our newsletter via Substack coming out tomorrow, Friday, that will be full of Aotearoa sport notes and nuggets. It's pretty good to sign up to that one because on a Monday you get the recap of the Aotearoa sporting weekend, and then we come back on a Friday with any bits and bobs from the midweek period, as well as previewing the Aotearoa sporting weekend. So sign up to that via Substack. And if you upgrade to a paid Substack subscription, or you want to support us via Patreon, we also have an extra podcast, the Subscriber Podcast, which comes out alongside the Variety Show. And in the Subscriber Podcast this week, we talked about the value of Trent Boult compared to Kane Williamson. And we also talked about Kiwi football, bit of Warriors as well. So that came out on Tuesday. So that's there for the subscribers via Patreon and the paid Substack subscription. For anyone who'd like to support the Niche Case directly, otherwise your presence is all good. Hope you're doing well. Hope you're enjoying the Aotearoa winter months. We've got another cool podcast coming up today. Warriors versus Seagulls, a little bit of Blackcaps, and lots of Kiwi football as per. But we need to start with some mindfulness. Old mate, what do you got?
I've got a little bit from I was going to say from the ancient brother Marcus Aurelius, everyone's favorite Roman emperor. Um, Maybe everyone's second favorite. I don't know. People seem to know Julius Caesar better, but I think Marcus Aurelius seems to be a bit of uh, a more likable character. Um, from the old meditations here, to love only what happens, what was destined, no greater harmony. Which I think means there is no greater harmony than that, I think is what he's trying to say. But yeah, to love only what happens, what was destined.
Because everything that happened got you to this point now, and if you're happy and grateful in this point now, then you can love everything that happened that got you to now.
And then on the flip side, if you try to like send all your energies to stuff that didn't happen, you're kind of just wasting your time. You gotta take what actually happened, and then you find that perspective that you're talking about there, which is where you find that harmony, I suppose.
Let's find a bit of harmony. Let's just make it our intention today with the Niche Cast to find a bit of harmony, a bit of peace within ourselves, and hopefully the listener as well. You can find some harmony and just have a bit of fun. Enjoy yourself, enjoy the moment, enjoy today. And we are going to start with a bit of Blackcaps. The Blackcaps are about to begin their T20 International Series against the United Arab Emirates. 3 T20 games. Starting Friday morning, we've got another one Sunday morning, then Monday morning. All 3 of these games are on Sky Sport, and then when the Tour of England, T20s and ODIs starts, then it flips over to TVNZ. Just a bit of logistics there for your viewing experience. And obviously it's a depth squad for the Blackcaps in the UAE. That's a good way to look at it. I'd say it's between like a second and third 11, a B and a C team. If you're thinking about your local cricket club, you got Premier Reserve, second 11, and then you've got your third 11, your school team, your club team, whatever it is. At the moment, we're dealing with a bit of a mix of the second 11, couple of third 11 players rising up for their development excursion. There are a sprinkling of first 11 lads in there, but it's mainly a development tour. So you do have those like premier players, the first 11 lads who are like sticking around. They're just hanging out, love to play cricket. They're leading the younger brigade at your local club. You've got a couple second 11 lads bolstering the squad. A couple of dudes are out sick. A couple of dudes are away traveling. So then you call up the third 11 players for a bit of development, fill the spots as well. Who are you looking at in this Blackcaps T20 squad just for the UAE series as an interesting geezer, given the wider Blackcaps context of everything else that is happening? Who's one player that you're most interested in?
Well, there's a few ways I could go with that. Because on one hand, it's kind of interesting just to see how like Tim Southee operates with a team like this as the captain. He is the test captain as well these days. So this is further on his leadership journey. But I'm not so sure that what he does with the ball is actually particularly interesting. So that maybe doesn't, or certainly not as interesting as the stuff he's going to be doing in the weeks to come. So maybe that one balances out. I think in that case, um, I don't know, like if Mark Chapman does what he did in the last 2020 series, the way that he played, that would be pretty cool. But I think I'm quite curious to see Dean Foxcroft go because um, I was surprised to see him picked in this team because I didn't realize he was eligible yet because I wasn't sure how that worked because I know he was trying to get his eligibility because he's obviously, South African, moved here and been doing excellent things with Otago, but then during the COVID stuff, he was stuck overseas and he couldn't come back. And I wondered, would that like affect his residency stuff? And I guess not, because he's in the Blackcaps. So I guess that's not an issue. I don't know. But I think because of that, he's a player. He's not going to come in and be Devon Conway straight away like he did when he got eligible and just was instantly incredible, like instantly world class. But I do think Foxcroft, who's a few years younger and has probably slid under the radar for just the surface level kind of cricket fan who tunes into the Blackcaps and not necessarily the domestic stuff. So I think he's a player who might catch some people by surprise by just how good he is, basically. And this is a nice little entry into international cricket for him.
He's definitely good at cricket. So before the pandemic, he played for CD. I don't know if he played for Otago before he was exiled.
I think he did. I think he had played a season because I remember seeing stuff on him from Otago Daily Times, which maybe that was just because he'd signed with them, but I think he did a season, at least one season with Otago before that.
And basically, as soon as he started playing for CD, he was scoring runs, especially in their white ball setup. And then obviously the pandemic happens. He's stuck overseas. Bit of a rough trot for him, but he comes back to Otago and he's basically the best batter last summer. And that's a very, he hasn't had the sustained, consistent amount of runs and just pure domination of runs as Devon Conway. Because Devon Conway it was a couple of seasons of just disgusting run scoring. Foxcroft hasn't quite done that, but it's kind of Conway-ish, just the way he's scored lots of runs in different formats, and he is a leader of that Otago team. Like, it's a very young Otago setup, but Foxcroft, he might be the most important player. Are you thinking about Jacob Duffy, Jacob Duffy was called into the squad, replacing Blair Tickner. Duffy's always really important for Otago, but Foxcroft, super smash batting, a little bit of off spin for trophy batting, Plunkett Shield batting in a lineup where you've got Hamish Rutherford's a veteran, but you've got like Dale Phillips, Thorne Parks, those type of characters. Jacob Cumming as well, a little bit of Glenn Phillips. But Foxcroft was the main dude, and it's going to be interesting to see what he does in the UAE, especially because he does bowl, so he's in that mixture with like Cole McConchie. I think Foxcroft is going to bowl more overs than Mark Chapman, let me put it that way, because Mark Chapman doesn't bowl anymore. My one dude I'm interested in is Tim Seifert, because Tim Seifert has vanished from the Blackcaps teams of late. And he was good in the Super Smash, and he has like a little bit of Northern Districts T20 mana with back-to-back Super Smash championships. But he hasn't really been playing Blackcaps, and he had, there's Dane Cleaver's also in the squad, and Dane Cleaver's played more Blackcaps cricket, I feel like, than Seifert over the past 12 to 18 months. And there's, as we know, Tom Blundell's not in these squads, which could be interesting for the World Cup. Tim Seifert is the original, like, punchy. Well, he's not the original, but he's the OG in the current crop of wicketkeepers, because Tim Seifert was doing all this before, Dane Cleaver came into the equation, and before Cameron Fletcher entered the equation. He was doing it before Tom Blundell played for the Blackcaps even. Like, he was playing ODIs and T20s as well. So I'm interested in what Tim Seifert does against the UAE. It does feel like some of these Blackcaps batters are going to be in destructive form. Like, Chad Bowes is just going to have a whack straight off the top. Tim Seifert's going to have a whack. Neesham's just going to be slugging boundaries down the order. Foxcroft has a bit of craft, and I'm also just highlighting an interesting bloke. For World Cup context, I think the most interesting one is Will Young. Because there has been buzz, we've talked about it, with Kane Williamson possibly playing for the Blackcaps at the World Cup. But if Kane Williamson's not playing, I still have Will Young as the dude who replaces Kane Williamson. There's different options available. You can promote a batter. You can promote a bowler. You can promote an all-rounder to absorb that loss of Kane Williamson. But I think, like for like, as we discussed, it might have been Variety Show or the Subscriber podcast, Will Young's got some good averages. He deserves a crack, but he's got to really dominate a series like this, I reckon. And he was fantastic in the Super Smash. Like, Will Young isn't a low and slow crafter, which some people might think because he was a test opener for the Blackcaps. Will Young in the Super Smash whacks boundaries, and there's I made a clip during the county season of him banging county championship sixes. So he's got some frisky hitting, and I think with the World Cup context, I don't think Tim Seifert is a realistic World Cup chance. I think him, Dane Cleaver, and the other wicketkeepers there behind Tom Blundell. But again, there's a bit of uncertainty there with Tom Blundell and what he's up to as far as World Cup contention goes as a squad member. But for this UAE series and forecasting forward to the World Cup, I do think Will Young is a very interesting Blackcap.
And yeah, Dane Cleaver is in the squad as well. So the Seifert thing is kind of funky in that aspect as well. You might get a little bit of head-to-head, whether they both play and one is as a batter. Right? That's certainly possible. Seifert just plays as a batter and Cleaver is the wicketkeeper batsman. Or they might alternate, or one might just play and the other one's there as the backup on the sideline. We'll see how that goes, because that'll tell us a little bit about how that pecking order is looking right now. Adi Ashok is the other potential debutant along with Foxcroft. So he's definitely one for the future rather than like right now. But it's a nice, again, like same as Foxcroft, it's a nice way to ease him into getting some international experience, which is kind of like, I guess that is kind of like the next step on the pathway for him, because I'm pretty sure like he's played some New Zealand A stuff already, hasn't he? He's had a year or two of domestic cricket. He's now pretty much an all format player for the for Auckland, which is nice. Like I think he came in mostly just playing Plunket Shield A, and now or was it Super Smash? I can't remember, but he started to play a bit of both and getting his 4 trophy reps in as well. So he's certainly someone who's a big talent, moving. Probably not, not for this World Cup, but potentially for the next World Cup after it. And yeah, there's a few of those other guys who are like, I think Jimmy Neesham, Will Young, as you mentioned, Kyle Jamieson for fitness reasons, like guys who are trying to get in reps ahead of the World Cup, trying to prove their spot in the World Cup. Not really. This isn't really the tour where they're going to do that. Like, this isn't the tour where you're going to be like so good against. Rachin Ravindra I'd put in that category as well, since Bracewell's out. Like, Rachin Ravindra has an amazing series and takes like 10 wickets and scores 150 runs at a big strike rate or something. You're not going to be like, that was so good, he's got to go into the World Cup squad. But it would be a nice way to get a running start into the games. For example, the series against England coming up, which I think will be much more telling of of that ODI picture moving forward rather than T20s in the UAE. But it is it is a nice running start for some of these guys who do have a point to prove across the wider tour, less so these first few games.
Friday night, we have the New Zealand Warriors taking on the Manly Sea Eagles, and of course the Mount Smart has been renamed Go Media Stadium, which has been renamed as Daniel Anderson Stadium. So we're dealing with three options for the
Daniel
venue.
Anderson, Go Media, Mount Smart Stadium. I couldn't even get it all out.
Well, you've got three options. You don't have to go with the one name featuring three different names. You can use one or the other for the sporting venue in Penrose. Obviously, the Daniel Anderson Stadium is quite wholesome. I'd say that's more that is more wholesome than the mana of Mount Smart, and then Go Media Stadium is a distant third. So that's how we'll rank the various options available. Big up, Daniel Anderson. Warriors are taking on the Sea Eagles. And this has been racking my brain. This has been stretching the imagination. I had to do a lot of meditation and pondering about this game and what's happening with the Warriors. And this is going to be interesting because you don't have to have seen what the Sea Eagles did against Panthers, but there was certainly a lot of storylines out of the Sea Eagles' loss to the Panthers last week as far as their tactics and what they were trying to do against the Panthers. And I feel like what the Sea Eagles, coming off that loss against the Panthers, in which they try to play force back, they tried to throw the ball around just to disrupt the rhythm of the Panthers. That seems aligned with how the Titans and Tigers play their rugby league. So I wrote this morning in the preview that this is the third quirky opponent in a row. But it's all a bit, there are nuances, there are slight differences in how each of these teams operate. I don't feel like the Sea Eagles have the same, mana doesn't seem to suit it. Like, they don't have the same fortitude as the Titans and Tigers, which is a bit weird to say, but it's like I think the Titans and Tigers realize they are already out of the finals. Again, nothing to lose, as I've said a couple weeks in a row, and digesting those wins for the Warriors. The Sea Eagles just seem like they are ready to crumble, but they also have a bit of razzle dazzle, a bit of different tactics to challenge your rhythm and your flow. It's going to be interesting, as well as the fact that the Warriors play footy like the Panthers. So the whole Sea Eagles game plan was designed to upset the rhythm of the Panthers. The Warriors do the same thing as the Panthers basically across their whole club. The way they develop talent, the way they manage the salary cap, and especially how they operate as an NRL squad. The Warriors are going to complete their sets. They're going to kick the ball. And I think a key addition to the Warriors game plan is keeping the ball in play. That's, it's easy to do with the high kicks because Rocco Berry is just going to get there. Same time the dude catches the ball, tackles him, wraps him up, puts him down. But there are a couple examples against the Tigers where Sean Johnson was visibly disappointed when I think it was two of his punchy kicks went over the touchline. And that was when the game was kind of in the balance in the second half. And I think the Warriors want to keep the ball in play just so they can roll through their plan. Complete your set, smash the other team down their end of the field, and just keep doing it. And as you enter the territory advantage, that's when you start going, you're attacking shapes and attacking this spot, attacking that spot, attacking this weakness, and so on. I think the Tigers benefited from having the ball go out a few times, and the disappointment from Sean Johnson was the most important thing there, because that tells you his intention. his intention was to dribble the ball into like a 10-meter zone near the try line and the goal line for his team just to get up and smash the Tigers. That didn't happen, and what happens instead? The Tigers, they might have a play the ball or a scrum in the midfield where they have more space, where they don't have the set defensive line and so on. So I think all of which is to say that is quite similar to what the Panthers want to do, because the Panthers, they just complete their sets. Nathan Cleary kicks long, balls in play, whack your opponent, win the territory battle, win the possession battle. That's what the Warriors do. And sure, the Warriors are not as good as the Panthers. Let's make that clear right now. Because they don't have Fisher Harris, they don't have Moses Leota, and they don't have Scott Sorensen.
Or like back-to-back premierships or whatever it is.
Yeah, I was just highlighting the Kiwis angle. That's my... Because their back-to-back premierships is pretty Australian. But they are led by the best prop duo, which is the Aotearoa Kiwis pair of Moses Leota and Fisher Harris. The Warriors are not as good as the Panthers, but if Anthony Seibold, who's a bit of a weirdo as a coach, like not a weirdo for just trying weird things and quirky things, because that's what we do. It's not weirdo in that sense, but he says a lot of good words, and he just hasn't like backed it up with sustained success anywhere. But he had this grand plan against the Panthers, right? He's going to do these funky things to upset the rhythm of the Panthers. What's he going to do against the Warriors? Because they do similar stuff as the Panthers. It's going to be interesting to see how Seibold and the Sea Eagles, that's an interesting one, Seibold and the Sea Eagles. It's going to be interesting to
Eagles.
See. Yeah, if you spelt Sea Eagles with S-E-I, Eagles, that would be a good mix.
There you go.
It'll be very interesting to see what the Sea Eagles do, but I think they can get the same result as they got against the Panthers. Like, there's nothing to say that the Warriors can't execute their style of footy and settle into the grind. Like, if either way, it's going to be interesting, because if the Sea Eagles don't respect the Warriors' style of play, they can get smoked by the Warriors playing the Panthers style. If the Sea Eagles come out with the same plan, I think Andrew Webster, former assistant coach of the Panthers, I think he's going to realize that, and he is going to take advantage as well.
Well, I suppose one thing that the Warriors, in their current state as the Shadow Panthers, one thing the Warriors do have as an advantage this weekend is they did get to see this last week. Like the Sea Eagles' approach to playing against this style of footy has been fully scouted by them. They're not going to be caught by surprise by what the Sea Eagles did to the Panthers, because now they know that it's coming, which is nice bit of preparation. At least they can get in their responses nice and early. The other thing there from what you were saying that really kind of dwelled with me is that idea of it's the keeping the ball in play idea. Like, I just kind of wanted to ask what the not purpose, because that's why they're doing it, but the intention of what they're going for there. Is that just the territory battle? Is that like keep the ball in the corner and just know that they've got a kick chase to keep them plugged there? Is it like fitness? Is that like the Warriors back themselves to outlast teams, so they want to keep the ball in play and have the game unfolding at just that higher pace because they know they can handle it and other teams maybe can't? Or is it like just a matter of rhythm, just keeping the ball in there so everything's happening in step? Like, what's the intent behind that kind of strategy?
A lot of it is to control the game and where the opposition gets the ball. I do think that the difference between turning the ball over close to their try line, or even if you're 20 meters off the try line, at least getting them by the sideline, there is a big difference between that start to your set and I think it's to play the ball or the scrum in the middle of the field. So that's part of it. You're also just keeping the ball in play longer and forcing repeat efforts, because the way the Warriors and, as you said, the Shadow Panthers, the way they attack is forcing a lot of repeat efforts. And that, I think it has a lot to do with working over the middle. So it's not just the runners running through the middle and forcing tackles. It's also sending guys from the outside back into the middle and forcing the middle defenders to tackle a bit of footwork, a couple of different bodies, a bit of speed and offloads and stuff like that. So basically, I think what I'm seeing is that the whole game plan is to force those repeat efforts, force the fatigue, and I just think the keeping the ball in play for longer suits that, especially when you're coming up against a team like the Sea Eagles, who are last in kick return meters. It's a funny one where the Warriors they've just got their style of play, and we've seen their style of play, and we've seen them execute it in a variety of ways this season. Earlier in the season, they were operating with their completion rate over 80% for a lot of they were first or second, I think, at some stage for completion rate. That has dropped off, I do believe. I'll just double check that as I'm speaking, but they were right up there with the Panthers for completion rate. And that's a key element of their style of footy, set completion. The Warriors are now sixth at 79%. So they've been, and the Panthers, they are first for 83%. So that's to me, I think that fits into the style of footy, keeping the ball in play. What do you want to do with that? You want to complete your sets. You want to force repeat efforts and control the tempo of the game. It just so happens that is a nice matchup coming up against the Sea Eagles, who are worse for kick return meters. They're not just worse, they're worse by a significant margin. They're 17th with 2,957. They're the only team below 3,000 kick return meters. Warriors have 3,800. The Sea Eagles aren't even over 3,000. The Warriors are fifth, no surprises who is first. The Panthers are first for kick return meters, and they're also first for set completion. 83% set completion. No other team has higher than 80% set completion. So the Warriors are definitely the Shadow Panthers. They're not the Panthers. They are trying to do Panthers things, but they are the Shadow Panthers, because you got to be doing some crazy stuff to be as good as the Panthers right now. Yeah, not sure what your question was.
Well, you sort of explained it. The intent of that whole keeping the ball in play thing basically seems to be control. Like it's a matter of how they run the game. And I guess when I think about it, all those things are kind of related too. Like it is a fitness battle. It's a fitness battle because they're controlling the game and they're asking the other team to do more work, and then they're going to get more tired, which means the Warriors' fitness thrives because they're not under the same level of fatigue. They're making better decisions. They're playing at the right end of the field, and that's all plays into your rhythm as well. When you're controlling things, it's like you're dictating where and how the game is being played and at what speed. It's like everything will flow on naturally from that if you can get yourself into that state. It is rhythm, and I guess it's like throwing it back to the one of the words of the day, from going all the way back to the mindfulness there, which only 20 minutes ago, but the harmony again, right? It's those things, those different elements complement each other, I suppose, is the way to think about it. Because when you are in control, you are going to look fitter, you are going to own the territory battle, but also owning the territory battle helps you stay in control, and that helps you, your fitness helps you get to that play. Like all these things are kind of aligned in a way where when they work, each one of them lifts up the other one in a way. So I'm trying to think of a good metaphor to make that up. I'm not sure I got one, but the harmony you'll have to do.
That harmony was a lot clearer earlier in the season. I think the last month or so of Warriors Rugby League, the title for the preview this week was by winning by any means possible. And I think that has been the theme of the last month, is just winning by any means possible. There have been some, we talked about in the subscriber podcast, just the managing of minutes and managing the workloads with some of these players and the Warriors. And I do think that is a factor, but the harmony between all the aspects of Warriors Rugby League hasn't quite been there in the last few weeks. Whether it is Sean Johnson dribbling his punches over the sideline and missing that little execution moment, whether it is their attacking shape, just a couple of passes going behind players, whether it's a major element that was on fire against the Tigers was the passing in the middle third, because as I said earlier in the week, Variety Show subscriber podcast, Tohu Harris scored a try. He scored 2 tries in a row, 2 games in a row. Whanua Blake scored a try. Mitchell Barnett had a line break. That's all from passing and putting the other forward into space. So that aspect of Warriors footy was there. Their defense has been good enough, but the whole package hasn't come together, and that's all good. Like, you're not going to have that level of performance throughout a whole NRL season. Even the Panthers will ride the wave of playing their best footy and just getting the win and doing what they want to do versus doing what they have to do, is I think is a good way to look at it. And the Warriors have done what they have to do in the past month. They haven't exactly done what they want to do. And the more I think about it, it's a pretty interesting coaching battle between the Shadow Panther, Andrew Webster, and Anthony Seibold, because I think Webster's the real deal. I don't really think Anthony Seibold's the real deal. And Seibold's going to know their kick return meters, right? So he knows what his team does well, and he knows what the opposition does well. And given what we've said about the Shadow Panthers element, and what the Sea Eagles are good at and not so good at, I'm fascinated to see what Seibold does and what Andrew Webster does with how the Warriors play against the Sea Eagles.
Yeah, the last few weeks have sort of been a little bit of a I don't know, a return to the grind, I guess, in a way for the Warriors, but it maybe hasn't been as sort of like clinically grinding as they were in the first few weeks, where it really felt like that was like the getting the engine to rev over, like start just getting a little bit of forward momentum into their season. And they have expanded how they've played since then. Like, they've brought in these other elements. They've been quite a flowing attacking team at times, where they've been able to get, like, specifically it feels like, you know this better than I, but at my more distanced perspective, it feels like that sort of right edge shift has been quite effective, where, like, just getting the ball to Wadene Zelezniak 5 meters out for the try line and let him finish has been a pretty good tactic in recent weeks. He had another blinder of a finish for one of the tries last week. So, like, they it has been a little bit of that, but, like, at the same time, winning by any means necessary is also the aim of the game when you get to finals footy. Like, that's a very important thing to have. It's like, you can't just be one of those teams who only win by 20 points or they lose. Like, we do see those types of teams sometimes where it's like, when things go well, everything looks amazing. When plan A doesn't work, we're not really sure how to win on an off day. The Warriors have been able to do that, admittedly, against some of the not so great teams. But before that, they destroyed the Sharks, and I think destroyed the Eels, if I'm remembering that right, which is all part of the same 5-game win streak. Like, they haven't lost in between that. They've still had that. And I don't know, I think it's important to show, I think it's important to have variety in lots of different ways with these kind of things, but variety of how you win is another one of those areas in which that's important, where you can win when everything's working. Sure, like, most teams can win when everything clicks and is going beautifully. Can you win when that's not the case? Can you win when it's not the case in multiple different ways as well? Is pretty handy. It's like the I think that Golden Point win against the Raiders, wasn't it? Which feels like quite a significant moment for them because it was a game which they threw away and then still had the mentality to be like, bugger it, man, we're just going to run up the field and score first possession of Golden Point. No dramas. Like, we got this. The they've got a bit of that in them. So, and they are on a 5 game winning streak, as important. Like, you just keep winning, you keep ticking them over. There's nothing too much to worry about. But yeah, like they'll need to be better, I suppose, in the finals against tougher teams. But also, those teams will show them different things to what these other teams are doing. Where they've come up with up against a couple teams recently who are really just like playing for pride. I think a word you used earlier when we were talking was disruptors is quite a good one for that. It's like teams that were just out there to be disruptive. And they've won all those games still. It may not have been pretty, but they won all those games. That is the most important thing.
And there's another interesting weakness to attack with the Seagulls because they seem to be they look as though they are going to play Josh Schuster at edge forward and bring in Jacob Arthur into that halves position, probably defending on the left side of the field because you'll have Cherry Evans and Olakawatu on the right side of the field. The Warriors' attacking shape, move into their right edge, has been a key weapon all season. I would like to see a bit, as you said, a bit more variety in how they do attack and where they score their points. Although we did see that because last week, Fanua Blake scored a try, Tohu Harris scored a try. Luke Metcalf scored a try, but it was straight up the guts, supporting Mitchell Barnett. And there was a try to Adam Pompey on the left side as well, just with a good bit of ball playing. Sean Johnson sliding over to the left side of the field and picking out Adam Pompey with a nice pass. The Sea Eagles, old mate Schuster's going to have Manatini Okori running at him for most of that game, and not necessarily running at Schuster and making Schuster tackle, but running between Schuster and Jacob Arthur, forcing them into a lot of work. And this is where you stack everything up. So if you're keeping the ball in play, someone like Schuster has to, jog on to get behind the ball. And if you add on to that a bunch of tackles and smashing him every time he gets the footy, then Schuster has to make defensive reads under pressure, under fatigue. And the Warriors' shape, we've seen it all season on that right side of the field. There's so many options. Like Sean Johnson can go short. Sean Johnson might get the ball in a wider channel from Tohu Harris or Dylan Walker. He can go out the back to Shans Nickel-Clockstar. I'm curious to see if Nickel-Clockstar and or Wade Egan do play this game. Wade Egan was obviously battling that throat knock from the Tigers game, so I don't you want to be taking caution with that type of injury. And obviously Nickel-Clockstar's had a couple of head knocks this season, so no need to rush him. Easy solutions. Tain Tuapiki goes to fullback, Freddie Lussick goes to hooker. Whoever that fullback is, he's going to be sweeping out the back on the right side of the field. I do think Nickel-Clockstar has a better execution of the shape plays and better decision making, whereas Tain Tuapiki has a bit more zip, a bit more speed to trouble those defenders. But it's going to be a long game for Schuster and Jacob Arthur. Even if Schuster's playing as a half, he's going to be challenged defensively, and there's going to be not just big bodies running at him. Like Rocco Berry's going to challenge him, and there's going to be shape either side of Schuster, and he's going to have to really make strong defensive reads, which I don't know if he is going to do that. And that's part of the little battle here between the coaches, because Seibold, in theory, he's a good coach. In theory, he knows all of this, right? So I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. He knows all of this. So what does he do to counter? How does he counter the Shadow Panthers element? And how do the Warriors... I don't think the Warriors have to do anything funky, right? Like I think the Sea Eagles, they feel like they have to do all these funky things to challenge the opponent. I think the Warriors can just go about their regular mahi and grind the Sea Eagles down, and they'll be able to score points. They should be able to... I was thinking about this because like their defense has been all right. Like they've won these games. They haven't conceded 30 points many times this season, but they did leak a few tries against the Titans and especially the Tigers. And thinking back to the tries the Tigers scored, you had Dane Laurie making a break through the middle between Fanua Blake and Mitchell Barnett. And there was another try where Jareen Buller got the ball off a quick play the ball down the short side on the right, and the Warriors had like one defender set up there. Both of those seem... I think Shans Nickel-Crockstar would solve those problems. He would get the spacing sorted in the defensive line between Fanua Blake and Mitchell Barnett, and he'd also be making sure the right numbers are in the right place. And that's part of what makes Shans Nickel-Crockstar so good. He's safe at the back, mopping up, but he also communicates clearly. And as you piece it all together, right, I said Shans Nickel-Crockstar is a better decision maker out the back of shape than Tain Tuaupiki. And he's better at executing the right decision. That seems to fit nicely together with Shans Nickel-Crockstar being better at communicating clearly and telling everyone where they need to go, making sure the numbers are right. So I think missing him does impact the Warriors' defense a little bit. So it'll be obviously interesting to see what happens there against the Sea Eagles. But the Warriors should be, like, assuming everyone's fired up and ready to play footy, they should be too good defensively. And, you know, I talked about Rockaberry last week. Like, he's a good defender. Adam Pompey is a good defender. They've got fairly good defenders across the park, and they should be able to do what they want to do against the Seagulls, which I think is a mark of a good team and a mark of a good coach.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the Seagulls' recent results, and it is definitely the case that they haven't, like, I don't know, none of them have really been high scorers is the thing. Like their last couple were 24-12 loss to the Panthers, 26-16 loss to the Roosters. They beat the Dragons 24-18. Like these are all sort of like, they're not low scoring games, but they're in the middle. They're definitely not high scoring games. You're not getting both teams over 30. A little bit more. They did win 30-26 over the Sharks on the upper end of that scale. But, you know, you got to go back to June when they put 58 on the Dolphins. Like they're not, they had a nice little run of form in the middle there, but they're certainly not the kind of team that has, like, I don't know, I guess you could say, to throw it back to that earlier thing, not necessarily the kind of team that controls things and gets everything their own way in that shape. So the other thing I was looking at is the table, and the Broncos have played 22, so they still have a bye to come
this weekend.
Yeah, which is this weekend, which I guess that means they get 2 points for that. So that'll take them to 40. So it doesn't look like the Warriors, like the best case scenario for the Warriors to finish in the top two would be either Penrith lose all three of their remaining games. Seems unlikely when they're on a 7-game winning streak. They have the Titans, Eels, and Cowboys. So I think more likely they don't lose any of those games. So, and then Brisbane, they can only catch them on points differential, which currently is almost, you know, it's about 90 points ahead for the Broncos in their favor at this point. So I don't think the Warriors can finish any higher than third. But they are still 2 points clear of Melbourne and 4 points clear of Cronulla and Canberra, all of whom have 3 games left to play. The third place is there for the taking. Like, this isn't the kind of game where the Warriors have to be like, it's win at all costs, because obviously, you know, they're not going to rush Nickel-Crockstar back at this point if he's not 100%, because why would you? The finals is what matters. But they are gunning for that third place, and it's there for them. It's like it's there for the taking with their remaining fixtures as home to the Seagulls, home to the Dragons, and away to the Dolphins. There's no reason why they should lose any more than one of those at the most. And if that's the case, considering that Melbourne do still have to play the Broncos as well, that's a game that Melbourne could potentially lose. Like, that's very well in the Warriors' favor to get a third place finish here.
Got to get the dub, though, and that's why winning by any means possible is the most important thing. There was an announcement about some International Rugby League, And with that in mind, I do have a couple of key points that I'm interested in this week. The first is the Parramatta Eels halves combination, Dejan Arce officially named alongside Dylan Brown. And Dylan Brown, he's got to play his way back into the Kiwis because he did have an issue, off-field issue that made him miss a few games. And he's now named at halfback alongside Dejan Arce. I think Dejan Arce can be a contender to play for Aotearoa A. There is a New Zealand A team that will be in action in the test window as well, but I think he's also Samoan, so plenty to play for Dejan Arce. Dylan Brown's going to be halfback leading that team around against the Roosters, which is a tough battle, but it's a great challenge for Dylan Brown to show what he's capable of. Also got Bailey Simonson. I think he's a Kiwis squad member. Wiremu Greig's a New Zealand A caliber player at the moment, so he could get into that squad. And they're playing the Roosters, as I said, who have 3 top-notch Kiwi squad members in their team who want to play finals footy really bad. Joseph Manu, Jared Waerea-Hargreaves, and Brandon Smith. They're top 17 Kiwis players, and they need to take the Roosters into the finals. Fascinating battle. Like, I want to see Dejan Arce shine alongside Dylan Brown. I want to see that halves combination flourish. Tough to do it against that Roosters team and the Roosters trio. Shout out Siwa Wong. He could be in the New Zealand A team as well, but he's also already represented Fiji, so he can just play test footy for Fiji, and that would be good for him. The Raiders are an interesting team as well because Michael Maguire is the assistant coach at the Raiders. He's also the Aotearoa Kiwis coach. And he is highly likely, I reckon, to promote Matthew Tomoko to a starting centre role. But there's also, Bailey Simonson, Remus Smith, Shans Nickel-Klokstad is a trusted servant of Michael Maguire as well. So it's no guarantee, but Matthew Tomoko's there, Jordan Rapine's there, Joseph Tapane's there. And they are all pushing for a Kiwis squad. I've got the Dolphins as an interesting team as well because you've got the Bromwich brothers are going to be chasing Kiwis. They've got a lot of Kiwis mana, and I can see them being rewarded for their Kiwis mana. I don't think they are. I think Kenny Bromwich can be a top 17 player. I think there's better middle forwards right now than Jesse Bromwich, but he's a servant. He's a veteran, and he deserves to be in the squad leading the Kiwis culture. Jermaine Sako, I do think Jermaine Sako is a top 3 winger. And I actually think my top 3 wingers for the Kiwis are Jermaine Sako, Jordan Rapana, and Ronaldo Mulitalo. I'll touch on the Warriors in a second, but I still have Watene Zelezniak just outside that bracket, primarily because, speaking of quirky, Rapana and Mulitalo, they do a lot of quirky shit. They pop up in the right place at the right time. They're fantastic finishers, as is Watene Zelezniak, but they just got that natural bit of funk and razzle-dazzle that I like. Isako, goal kicker. That's what the Kiwis need. He's got it. It's going to help his case. But the Dolphins also have some New Zealand A funk there. Valence Tafade could be a factor for New Zealand A. Connolly Lemuelu. He is also an interesting player there. Eligible for Samoa. Probably going to play for Samoa, but he's in the mix. Isaiah Katoa will play for Tonga. He's from Wellington. Shout out to him. And as I said, Ronaldo Mulitalo's in the equation. Sharks winger, who, alongside Braden Hamlin-Uele and Britton Nakora, have a lot to play for as far as Aotearoa Kiwis selection. He's a starting edge forward for me in the Kiwis. I think Ronaldo Mulitalo is a top 3 Kiwis winger. Braden Hamlin-Uele has played for Aotearoa and Samoa. He would be great for the Kiwis if you're putting him on the bench with the likes of Asafa Solomona, Griffin Neem, those type of characters. I think that would be amazing. And the funkiest thing about the Kiwis right now is the Warriors. Last year, mid-year test for the Kiwis, there were no Warriors in that team. Watene Zelezniak was in the squad, but he didn't play. Right now, I've got Sean Johnson as the starting half for the Kiwis. Shans Nickel-Klokstad is a factor at centre or wing, or fullback, sorry. You've got Marata Niokore a top 17, I reckon. So if you've got a bench for the Kiwis of Marata Niokore, Braden Hamlin, Uele, Nelson Asafa Solomona, that's pretty amazing. Rocco Berry and Adam Pompey I've got as New Zealand A players. Tamare Martin, if he comes back into the Warriors team, he could be a factor in the Kiwis as a playmaker, a bench utility. Dylan Walker wants to represent New Zealand, but he's not allowed to, which is a bummer for him. Toe Harris is retired from international footy. So I've got maybe 4, maybe 5 players from the Warriors who could play Kiwis. A lot of uncertainty around Tamare Martin, though. So we'll settle with 4. Toe Harris is retired, but I'd love to see a middle trio of Tohu Harris, Fisher Harris, and Joseph Tapine. That would be exceptional, but thankfully we've got a lot of depth. So Tohu Harris, he's not playing, doesn't really matter. Let's touch on a bit of footy because I was fascinated by the Women's World Cup and just doubling down on an observation we made after the football Ferns were knocked out. And they just didn't have the attacking players, right? We were quite clear about that. We see this as just a fact of where the football Ferns are at right now. Don't need to blame anyone. We don't need investigations. We don't need reasons why the football Ferns did this, that, criticism, whatever. Straight up, they just don't have the attacking talent of these other teams around the world. You look at Australia, Spain, England, Netherlands, and France. How have you observed that now that we've had quarterfinals and semifinals to watch? And I'm curious, do you have any updated thoughts on young female players who you are tracking who do offer that razzle-dazzle step-over type of funk?
Well, first off there, what you said about just take it for what it is and accept that the football Ferns are in a certain state rather than freaking out about things like because you had an expectation of them doing something they're not capable of or whatever. That seems to, I had to look it up again to remember what it was, but they reminded me a fair bit of the mindfulness that we started off with about just loving what happens and what was destined to happen and that being the harmonious way of doing things. That whole idea about not freaking out about things that didn't things that weren't to be, that applies there quite tightly. I just think it was very clear. We're seeing how clear it is, not in a way that it feels like we've learned it or needed to have it explored in this way, but just looking at some of the other teams that have gone this far in the World Cup does kind of highlight a lot of this. A good example is potentially the team that was arguably I'd say both the two defeated semifinalists probably have this in a way. It's like you can see with Spain and England, there's just so much talent. You don't even need to describe it. They've just got players falling out of their ears. Like Spain have some incredibly good players who aren't even at the World Cup because they didn't want to play for the coach. That's a whole drama that people can look up. On the other side of things, it's quite a weird little aspect to this. And England have a bunch of superstar players who aren't there as well because they're all injured. They've got about 4 starting level players who aren't available for this tournament, who were key players in their Euros victory, and hasn't slowed them down too much. But that's just the abundance of talent that they've got. You look at Sweden, a little bit more limited, certainly in what they can do attacking wise. They don't really have the dribblers, the dynamic, creative players, but what they do have is an advantage that they've just isolated, picked out, been we're good at set pieces. We can hit a main delivery into the box from a corner or a free kick, and we can win those headers. And if we arrange things nicely to where we can put ourselves in that position as often as possible, well, they did, and they scored a lot of goals from that. And then Australia, it's Australia's lost to England in the semi-final. It didn't feel like they were, it felt like the better team won. It felt like England were relatively in control. It was a good, close, competitive, really exciting game. England surprisingly combative from the start, just really chopping folks down, giving away a lot of fouls. Had to have been a target from them to rough up the Aussies a bit. But Australia nearly came right back into it. They did equalize through Sam Kerr scoring an outrageously good goal. It's how did they get back into that game? the world's best striker scored one of the world's best goals. It's simple like that. And you got Caitlin Ford doing things on the left wing. You got Haley Rasso on the right wing. Mary Fowler's been superb, except maybe a little bit of like just that finishing touch from her. But she's the youngest one of those players. Like she's going to be quite clearly an absolute world beater within a couple of years. This is world class attacking talent across their front four. Not a single football Ferns player would get into that starting lineup in the attacking areas. Like no one could compete with it. We don't have players who can do that stuff. How did Australia get back in the game against England? By just letting that world class attacking talent shine through. So that's just the state of where the football Ferns are at. But yeah, to your last part, there are players coming through that are different to what we've seen before. It's not like you look at the players who are signing professionally around the world, men's and women's too. Like the men's stuff is a little bit ahead. I think it feels like the men's academies in particular had just a bit more of a running start. Whereas obviously the Phoenix Women's Academy, it's really only this year that's been operating in full. They've had an academy side for a couple of years, but only this year have they had like full competitive games, 15s, 17s, under 20s, the whole shebang. So they're a little bit behind the thing, and the Ole Academy have had a couple of great players come through on the women's side, but they haven't really had the great teams come through the way that they've had one or two incredible ways with the bloke stuff. So that's still a work in progress. They're a couple of years behind, but you look at the men's side at the moment, like at a time when Chris Wood isn't playing that much, he's just popping up as a cameo sub in the Premier League. Guy who's been carrying all this weight for so long, you've suddenly got like just in the last couple of weeks, Callum McCall scored a goal, Ben Wayne scored a couple of goals, Alex Greaves scored a goal, Andre De Jong scored a goal, Joey Champness has scored a goal. Max Mata hasn't scored a goal because he's been waiting for his visa since he transferred to Shrewsbury Town. But before he left Ireland, he was the equal leading top goal scorer this year in that division. So like these guys are there. These are all younger players starting to break through at a higher level. Football Ferns, we've got players who can do that. I think Jackie Hand and Grace Jale is sort of the two next ones coming through from the current squad, and maybe a bit of Indy Riley as well. I'd add her to that mix. A little bit older and more experienced than some of the other ones I'm sort of thinking of, but I am going to write about this. So I'll save some of my ideas for the article. But in terms of players who can do different things to what we've seen in the past, like Millie Clegg is the obvious example of just a clinical finisher who is just has the knack for scoring goals. She'll pop up in the right place no matter what's happening in the game, and she's always going to get a big chance or two, and she's usually going to score them. I think that's something that Ben Wayne also has in his locker, is that same knack. So he showed it all the way through the Phoenix Academies himself. I think you look at the under 19 qualifiers in Oceania that went recently, they're scoring heaps of goals. So that's against weaker opposition. That's not really the point. But you sort of look at how they're playing it. Like Helena Arrington as a creative midfielder, she can throw in Stepovers. She can beat players like that. She can shoot. She can slide a perfect little pass in behind the defense. She can do that stuff. She's there. Ruby Nathan was another player who's got some nice skill, able to dribble a bit, able to finish really nicely. Great. Also great like crossing and sort of through ball kind of creative passer. She was the top scorer in that tournament. Wellington Phoenix just signing Macy Fraser, I think, is another great example of someone who sort of for the under 17s a couple of years ago when they got bronze, she was one of their better players, always looked a really tidy technical midfielder who can do some very good stuff there. Great touch. She's kind of a little bit TikTok famous for her juggling videos and whatnot. And then while we're talking about the Phoenix, there's also huge potential for a bounce back year from Alyssa Wynnum too, another player, like great close control. Wynnum and Fraser, both Cantabrians, by the way, as well. It seems to have a few. They're not that similar as players, but they do have a few similar like skill sets and positionally and stuff. Where like Wynnum is also someone who can thread a through ball, who can dribble past, great control, can chuck in a step over. Like these are players who are coming through. Like this is there. It's set up. It's just they weren't ready for this World Cup, Only Clegg of those group was in the squad. She didn't play any minutes. Give it 4 more years and we'll see where we're at,
I've boiled it down to the 3 S's. The football Ferns need stepovers, they need speed, and they need screamers.
You got those three things, you're doing all right.
You're doing all right. Righto, that's the niche cast. Big up yourself. Kia kaha. Stay beautiful. Church.